Welcome to my channel. This is Yellow Flicker. You are now watching the static website tutorial. Starting from this video, we will work on an example website and pick up the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript throughout the development process. It is a landing site or a farm called Fancy Farm. And at the homepage, it has a landing card with some hero introduction, as well as some lists and a pricing table. At the bottom of the page, there is a call to action block. At the top, we have a few links that can be clicked. The contact link brings the user to a contact form. In this video, we will first focus on defining the general structure as well as the necessary elements within these web pages. Then in the next video, we will use CSS to style all of these components. Finally, in the third video, we will use JavaScript to add some extra functionalities to this website. With things clarified, let's get started. Let's begin by defining our project structure. A typical entry point to our website is called index.html. Web browsers will try to look for this file by default. At the very top of this document, we are going to add this doctype HTML. This simply tells the web browser to render this document as an HTML5 web page. Then we use HTML. This is called a tag or a pair of tags. This is the starting tag, and this one with the leading slash is the ending or closing tag. This tag defines the root element of our HTML web page. And within this element, we can define more child elements, or we can simply put content inside of it. A typical HTML web page consists of two parts. The first one is called head. This head element is not directly visible to the user, but rather it is for web browsers or search engines, web crawlers to look for. It includes the basic information and some metadata about this web page. We usually use the title tag to control the text shown on the tab of the web browser. Let's call this Fancy Farm. The other major section is called body. This part is directly visible to the user, and this is where we put all of our designs and all of our elements. Let me first show you how to write a comment in HTML. We use this symbol, and it is highlighted in green. We can write our comments within these two arrows. We can also create multi-line comments. Within these two arrows, we simply create a new line, and it becomes a multi-line comment. In VS Code, I have installed this HTML Live server extension. So as we edit our HTML file, it is going to render the web page in real time. I'm on Mac OS, so I use Option S to start a web server. So now I can visit localhost :5050 to access our live preview of our web page. Let's begin by defining our titles. First, I'm going to use the H1, which stands for heading. And I'm going to type "Enjoy the nature." In HTML, there are a total of 6 headings, from H1 to H6. H1 usually has the largest size, and H6 has the smallest size. But one thing to keep in mind is that H1 to H6 are not arranged based on their sizes, but rather their importance. H1 is the most important one, while H6 is the least important one. Next, let's use the P tag, which stands for paragraph. I'm going to put a short description. A P tag by default has some extra blank space at the top and at the bottom. Next, let's define our hero sections. I'm going to use a div, which is an empty container. It is a generic element. We can do anything to it. And let's give it a class. A class is simply a category, which can be applied to multiple elements. And we use a class to identify some elements so that we can refer to these elements later on. I'm going to give this div a class of hero. And we're seeing nothing yet because this is just an empty container. Inside, I'm going to add the div, another div, and let's call this hero left. And I'm going to duplicate this div and call it hero right. On the left, let's put some text. I'm using B tag, which stands for bold. And let's copy this part. Have fun. And there we have a simple text here. Let's also add another paragraph. And I'm going to copy this text content and put it there. Good. So now we have a short title and a short description inside this hero left section. And on the right, I'm going to insert an image. We use the img tag for an image. And the image element is a self-closing tag. It does not come in a pair. To insert an image, we need to specify the source. So we use the src. This is called an attribute. Source is an attribute. Class is also an attribute. We simply copy the image address. Let's put it directly in here. Save. And there we have the image. But it's getting really large right now. So we may need to shrink its size by using the width attribute. Let's set it to 100%. And there we go. The image is now matching the size of this div element. Let's copy this div one more time. I'm building another hero section. And let's modify the content. So this time, we have to switch positions. So the image is on the left. And let's modify the text. It doesn't look like a hero section yet because we need to use CSS to adjust the arrangement of these elements, and we will do that in the next video. Next, let's work on these lists. In HTML, there are two types of lists. There is the unordered list as well as the ordered list. Let's begin by defining the unordered list, which introduces the facilities in the farm. So let's give it an h2 title, facilities. There we have it. Then let's use the ul tag to define an unordered list. Within the list, we use li to create the list items. Let's insert these items one by one. So if we have 4 items, we need 4 li elements. And there we go, we have created ourselves a list which is unordered. It uses bullets for each item. Then let's work on an ordered list. This time we are building a list that describes the ticket purchasing steps. To create an ordered list, we use the OL tag. And again, inside we use li for each item. All the items are being numbered. Next, let's define this pricing table. Again, we begin with an h2 tag, pricing. For this pricing title, I will give it an ID attribute. And let's call this pricing. ID and classes are very similar. The difference is, ID is unique. It can only be applied to one single element, while classes can be applied to many more elements. To define a table, we use the table tag. And within the table, we use tr to define a single row. Within a row, we can use either th or td. Th stands for table header. Since we have 3 columns, we're going to use 3 th tags. The first one is the type, the second one is the price, and the third one is the remarks. So now we have 3 columns being defined. It doesn't look a lot like a table yet, and again we will work on the styles in the next video. Let's continue defining the remaining rows. We make a new row using tr, and this time we will use td to specify a regular cell. So we have 3 tds. This one is adults. And the second column is the price, $16.99. And there we have created a table with 3 columns and 4 rows, or 5 rows if we count the header row. Let me introduce one more feature. We can specify the width of the tables and the columns. We do that using the width attribute. Let's set the table width to 100%. It now matches the width of the web page. So I choose the header cell in this column and I give it a width of 50%. So now this remarks would fill half the width of the web page. We can also use one cell for multiple columns. Let's try that. I'm creating a new row, and as we can see, we have 3 table cells for each row. This time, I'll be using just one single table cell. Let's call it test. And to make it easier to read, I'm going to give it a simple CSS style. Let's set the background color to yellow. Okay, so now this table cell is only in the first column. I can then use the column span attribute. If I give it a value of 2, it is going to come across the first 2 columns, like this. Similarly, if we change it to 3, it will be included for all 3 columns. Next, let's work on the call to action at the bottom. Let's use a div for this. And again, we use an h2. And let's write the text content. And this time we are working on a button. We use a button and we write the text content directly. Make a booking. And there we go. We have a title text with a clickable button. Next, I'm going to work on the nav bar. To create a nav bar, we can use the nav element. And we specify the big title, so I'm using the bolded text. Let's call it Fancy Farm. And to create links, we use the A tag. A is a clickable link. We first write the visible content, for example, home. In the href attribute, we have to specify the destination. So in this case, I'm using a single slash to refer to the root webpage. Again, we create another link. Let's call this pricing. I want it to direct the user to this pricing table when the user clicks on this link. To do that, we simply use a hashtag and we put pricing here. This hashtag stands for ID. Remember earlier we added an ID to this pricing title, and we are using it here. So now when we click on this pricing link, we'll be directed to this pricing table. Now let's create a third link and call it contact. When the user clicks on the contact link, he should be redirected to the contact page. So I'm using /contact.html, which brings the user to another HTML file. Let's go ahead and create the new file and call it contact.html. We begin by defining the basic template. So now with this file defined, we should be able to visit this web page. Since it doesn't have anything defined yet, it is a blank web page. Let's begin with an h1 tag, and I'm writing contact us here. To create a form, we use, of course, the form tag. And it has an action attribute. This action is the destination link that the data will be submitted to, and it is usually a URL. It looks something like submit form. It's just a URL. We can define it ourselves. There's another important attribute called method. We can specify the HTTP method to send the data. And in HTML, it supports dialog, get, and post methods. In this case, we'll be using the post method. Next, let's define some input fields. I'm using a B tag to specify the labels. So the first one is going to be full name. And to define an input field, we use the input element. Again, this is a self-closing tag. And immediately we have an input field. We can type some text inside. It is a good practice to specify the type attribute, and there are so many types that we can choose from. I'm choosing text for the name. Then we use the placeholder to add a hint text. Like this. We may also use the required attribute, which forces the user to fill in some values. If we want to disable this input field, we simply add the disabled attribute. So now we cannot edit this input. We may also hide this input field by using the hidden attribute. So now this input field is invisible. It is still present, it's just not visible. For text inputs, we can specify the max length. I can control the number of characters that the user can enter. Let's set it to 8. So now I will not be able to input more than 8 characters. Let's create another input field, and this time I'm calling it email. And similarly, we use the input to specify an input field, but this time the type we will use email. Let's also put a placeholder to hint the user. Okay. When we specify the type as email, the web browser will perform some checks. Does the value matches the necessary format of an email? Yeah, but it depends on the browser. Some browser does not perform this, then it has no use. Let's continue specifying other things. This time I'll be doing a description. And instead of an input, I'm using a text area. A text area is a multi-line text editor that we can fill in multiple lines of content. We may notice that this text area is resizable. We can change the size by dragging this corner. To disable this feature, we use CSS again. Style, resize, set it to none. Additionally, we may specify the number of rows using the rows attribute. Let's add an extra field here. I'm calling it age. This time we use the input again, but for the type I'm using number. We set the type to number, we can only input numbers into it. We cannot input other characters. And we can also adjust the value using these two arrows. To constrain the range of the value, we can use the min and the max attributes. For example, let's set min to 0 and max to 99. So now let's set it to 1 and try to reduce the value. It stops at 0. And similarly, if we increase the value, it is going to stop at 99. Next, let's add another field at the very top. I'm calling it prefix. And this time I will be creating a drop-down selection list. We do that using the select tag. Let's ignore these attributes first. For this select, we're going to add some options inside. Let's add some options. Mr., Mrs., Miss, and other. Make sure to specify a value for each of these options. For example, 0, 1, 2, and 3. The value is what will be sent to the server. We may also add a placeholder value for this. Call it please select. And we use the disabled attribute so that the user cannot select this option. We can also make this the default selected option by using the selected attribute. So now we can select multiple options. The first one is selected by default, but it is disabled. We cannot choose this one. Next, let's talk about the name attribute. Inside a form, we should specify a name for each of the input fields. Let's do that real quick. This step is extremely important because we need to specify the field to be sent to the server. Finally, let's add a submit button. We use, again, the input element, and there is a special type called submit. Yeah, there we go. We have a submit button. If we want to change the text, we can specify the value for this. Let's change this to submit contact. There we go. Let's use the line break to make some new lines between the input fields. So now it looks much more like a form. I've set all the fields to be required. So if I don't fill in anything right now and I hit submit, my web browser is going to tell me I should select or fill in some of these options. For the email field, if I don't write in a proper email format, my web browser is going to tell me that I should include this @ symbol within the value. And now we can submit the form. Since we don't have this action configured, so it is going to show error when we hit submit. And usually when we do a form, we will send it to a specific backend server. That is how we define the general structure, elements, and the necessary content for our website. In the next video, we will use CSS to make our website look more fancy. I'm Flicker, and I will see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.